So it's been a hot minute, and I am happy to be back with you with another message. And actually, this is one that I did like a few months ago at Bible study, and I'm just now sharing it with you guys. But it was inspired by, for those of you who don't know, I taught fourth grade science last school year, and we studied soils and we studied the different properties, and we planted seeds in them, and we just discussed our observations, we sketched it, we made predictions and so forth. And God really blew my mind with what we did in class, just because I got to see how dope God really is. And I just love when he speaks to us through nature, because it's just a reminder that like he really created all of this and it all has purpose. And so I don't really have a true like name or title for this. I would say maybe like soils, but we're going to start off talking about 4 different types of soil. In class we studied clay, potting soil, sand, and I'm forgetting one, topsoil and gravel. And so today we're talking about all of those except for gravel. We're going to talk about clay, potting soil, sand, and topsoil. That means I added something because I had 7, I think. I don't know. Anyway, so my first question I want to ask you is, which one of those 4 do you think would be best suitable for plant growth? And I just want you to think to yourself, do you think that it would be topsoil? And topsoil, is just the type of soil that you would find outside. And of course that varies depending on where you are, what part of the US or your state that you're in. So topsoil is just like regular dirt soil that you would find outside. Potting soil is a type of soil that has different nutrients in it that has been created by man for plants to thrive in. And so many people who have plants in their homes usually use potting soil. Clay, it's that red type of, it's like a red type of soil. And when it's wet, it's like really mushy. It can also be kind of gritty as well. But when it's hard, and when it's not wet, it's very hard and very dry. And then sand, we're just talking about, like the very fine sand that you might find at a beach or something like that. So which of those do you think would be best suitable for plant growth? My second question is, given that you plant the same seed in each one of those at the same time, which do you think would grow best and why? And my last question I want to ask you is, do you believe that they are all capable of some type of growth? Why or why not? Okay. As we move forward in the message that I prepared, or that God has given me rather, I want you to think of the soils as our hearts, and as I want to remind you that different soils have different properties, just like our hearts have different properties. And so again, the soil is going to represent our hearts, and I want you to keep in mind that plants can grow in unfit territories, because we see plants growing in the cracks of concrete. There are plants in the desert. And so I just want you to keep that in mind as well. I have some pictures I'm going to show you later of like our class experiment that we did. So I'm coming out of Matthew 13 today, and Jesus is speaking to the people, and he uses a parable. And so we're going to kind of split the chapter in half, and we're going to read 1 through 9 where he says the parable to the people, but they're like not getting it. So then he goes back in 18 through 23 and he explains the parable. So we're going to start with chapter 1 and read through verse 9. Again, that's Matthew 13 and 1. And it says, "The same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still, other seeds fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. He who has ears, let them hear. So here, Jesus explains he says the parable, and I encourage you, as you read that on your own time, I encourage you to just think about, what do you think those things mean? You know, Jesus always spoke in parables for a reason. And so I wanted you to just reflect and think about, who do you feel like you relate to the most? Which one of those do you believe you relate to the most? I want to jump down to verse 18 and read through 23. Verse 18 says, "Listen to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The one who received the seed that fell on rocky places is the man who hears the word at once, receives it with joy. But since he has no root, he lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, he quickly falls away. The one who receives the seed that fell among the thorns is the man who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke it out, making it unfruitful. But the one who received the seed that fell on the good soil is the man who hears the word and understands it. He produces a crop yielding 160 or 30 times what was sown." Okay, so I want to preface here that, but first, I want to say, who do you feel that you relate to the most and why? And I want to explain, before I get into the message, I want to explain that it's our job to allow God to come in and check our heart, okay? Because again, I'm relating the heart to the soil. And so it's not my job to come into your heart and start gardening and pulling up weeds and things like that. That's the Lord's job. That's not me. And it's your job to allow God to come in and do that. He's not going to force himself in and knock down the door of your heart. So first, we have to be in a place where we're checking our hearts. And I want you also to pay attention to how, yes, even in the I would say gravel, if we were relating it to this time, even in the parable, plants grew, but they didn't last because they didn't have root. And that kind of reminds me of another lesson that we did with my students, where we took a plastic baggie, like a sandwich bag, a wet paper towel, and we put some seeds on the paper towel. We put that inside of the baggie, closed it, taped it to a window where the sun was shining. And do you know that it grew? Like, straight up. And it did not have soil. And all it had was the moist paper towel inside of there, and of course the sunlight. But even though it grew, it did not grow very long because it did not have any deep roots, which Jesus kind of talked about there. And so I thought that was cool that I thought about that, and I was like, oh, that kind of related to it as well. And so going back to verses 18 through 23, I want to ask you, where are your seeds falling? And are you even sowing? Are you even planting any seeds? And so when I say, are you even planting seeds? I'm saying, are you even planting and depositing things into other people? Are you even being an example to other people? Because you can't answer number one if you aren't planting, right? And then number three, what's happening to the seeds inside of you? What kind of heart do you have? What type of soil do you have? Because in order for you to truly be a blessing and to truly plant, you have to make sure that your heart is right as well. And again, that goes back to allowing God to come in and do the gardening work on your heart. So we know to grow a seed, we know that it takes soil, we know that it takes water, we know that it takes light. And so if we're saying that our heart represents the soil, let's talk about how we can relate this physical thing to the spiritual in a spiritual way. So we need light and we need water. If you turn to First John, I believe it's First John 1 and 5. Yes, it is. First John, where are you? Oh, there it is. Okay, so First John 1 and 5 says, "This is the message we have heard from him and declare to you. God is light. In him there is no darkness at all." Fam, none, zero. Okay, so God is telling us that he is light. Like, it's really nothing else you can say. Like, he is light, period. Okay, and God also dwells in us. So if God is light, we find that in First John 1 and 5. God also says that he dwells in us. And if you don't know, 1 Corinthians 3 and 16 says, "Do you not know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit lives in you?" Okay, pause. So God is light and God dwells in us. So we have the light that these hearts need, that these other souls need, right? And we know that plants also need water. And in John 7 and 38, John 7 and 38 says, "Whoever believes in me, as the scripture has said, streams of living water will flow from within him." So we have the water and we have the light because we have God in us. And so basically what I'm wanting you to see is that we have what people need to grow, right? And other people have what we need to grow. So you have the light and you have the water. You should be planting. You should be watering. You should be shedding light, and then allow God to do the rest. So I want to talk a little bit about what are seeds exactly, because we use that churchy term, and I think that some people really don't know what that means. And I believe it's not limited to just one thing. I believe that seeds are anything that you speak with faith. Seeds are basically your faith in whatever it is that you're speaking. And also, I believe that seeds can also be or are also the fruits of the Spirit, which you can find in Galatians 5 and 22 through 23. And a couple of those are like love, joy, peace, faithfulness, those sorts of things. And we should be examples of those. And I can honestly say, like, I am not always an example of the fruits of the Spirit, but I am still trying and I am still working on that, and I am aware of it at least. I think what's scary and what's dangerous is when we're just out here living and we're not even aware that we're not living the right way all the time. So, again, seeds are what you're speaking and you have faith in. Seeds are the fruits of the Spirit. So you should be depositing those things into other people. And sometimes you will not be the person that deposits or plants that seed. You may be the person that's just watering. Like, maybe somebody else already planted the seed of joy, right? But through you, just going through your day and just giving God glory, or just testifying to what God has done, or just you being joyful that day at work, like, that is you watering that seed in that person. That is you shedding light. And so do not neglect the small things that you can do to shed light and to give water. And so we have to know that God should be using us to share with people who he is, and God is trying to use us to tell people what it means to follow Christ. but he can't do that if we're not willing to be used. And so basically, we should always be working, right? Always. Because we should be planting seeds, we should be watering seeds, we should be giving light to seeds. And if we're not doing that, if we're not, helping people, then we truly are not doing what we're supposed to, because this life is not even about us. And oftentimes we forget that. And I remember that was the biggest, like the mind-blowing emoji. Like, that was the biggest eye-opener for me to realize, like, Jazz, this life really isn't about you at all. Like, you are just an instrument that God is using. And so I want you to remember, like, don't worry about what kind of heart it is. Because, see, that's where we get caught up, right? We're like, oh, well, this person be doing this, this, and this, and they ain't right. Or they be sinning all the time. Or I don't agree with their lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. Or they weren't kind to me, so I'm not going to show kindness. And that's not how it works. God has called us to be a light no matter what. God has called us to forgive no matter what. God has called us to see other people the way he sees them. So you don't have the right to look at anybody else's heart. That's not your job. Your job is just to be obedient and to be an example to them. It's God's job to look at the heart. And like I said, it's that person's job to open up and allow God to work on their heart. But even if they don't truly receive right then your seed, you still did your job and you planted. And you have no idea that seed might get kicked back over where it should be by somebody else passing by, or somebody else may be able to pick that seed up and actually deposit it. You just have to be obedient. And something that as I was researching that I thought was really cool is that, plants track the light, the sun, the light, us, plants track the sun. And when I say track, I mean like they follow, like they grow towards that light. And so basically people should be growing towards us. People should be able to look to us, and we should all be able to grow towards the light. And many of us are not receiving light, and that's why we're all bent over and growing the opposite direction. And so are you tracking the light? Are you tracking God? So I want to show you some pictures of what we did in class. Again, I thought it was pretty dope. Again, we use several different types of soil. So we have, I'm just going to point them out first. We have different groups did different types. So we have clay here. This one's sand. This one looks like topsoil. This is sand. This is gravel. This is potting soil, these two. And then this is clay over here. And I want you to take a look at like what actually grew. The topsoil did not do a very good job of growing, but I just thought it was so dope that like the clay grew. And in a moment, I'm about to show you the what really like blew my mind. This is a picture of the clay, and it had very, very deep, long roots, and going back to my questions about, which type of soil would grow best and all that stuff, like most people would think like the clay because it's all dry and all that stuff. But as long as it's watered, it really does do a very good job of producing plants. And so we grew radish, and I'm honestly forgetting the other thing that we grew. But one other thing that I thought was so incredibly dope was gravel. We had gravel, and if you look very, very closely, you can see that there is a little green plant growing right here in the gravel. And you would think like, okay, gravel does not have any soil in this, like literally just rocks in this, straight rocks. And I was bamboozled because I didn't expect anything to grow. And so my students and I were just astonished, and I had I couldn't do anything but give God the glory. And I was just like laughing because like that's nobody but God. And it really spoke to me spiritually because, we are quick to say like, oh, that heart is not good enough for growth. It doesn't have the nutrients it needs. But it had a little bit. We put that seed in there by faith, right? And that group, they really wanted theirs to grow, and they were kind of bummed because they got gravel, and they were like, well, everybody else is gonna have something grow, but ours isn't. And there you go. And so I also was thinking, like, what if God put potting soil in the bottom of this? What if God put clay in the bottom of this gravel? What would really happen? So again, it's not your job to try and determine what type of heart is ready and ripe, and what heart can deserves your fruit or your seeds. Like, it's your job to plant, it's your job to water, it's your job to give light. And that's what we did with all of these plants. We had them underneath a growth lamp, and we watered them, and we watched them grow. And some of them, as you can see, did pretty well. And of course, they didn't live forever. They all ended up dying. We repotted them, and they didn't make it. But the purpose was just to show you that every type of soil produced, right? I didn't get the topsoil in this picture, but I did have another one of topsoil that did actually produce the plant. And I just thought it was so crazy that, like, marigold, that's the other thing we planted, radish and marigold. I thought it was so dope that, like, this clay out here thriving, y'all. Like, look, like, it has the most, I mean, the tallest plant, and I just thought that was crazy. It also had, like, really deep roots. So again, I want to ask you the questions that I asked you earlier. Where are your seeds falling? Are you even sowing? And what's happening to the seeds within you? Let God do the breaking up of the soil. Let God do the gardening. And don't feel like certain hearts cannot produce. That's not your job to determine. And so I just want you to be encouraged, and I really pray that you received the word today that God shared with me that I thought was so amazing. And it really was a heart check for me, just to remind myself that, like, you don't get to walk around judging folks. Like, that's not your job, right? And I pray that you will be more aware of the seeds that you're planting and the seeds that have been planted in you. And I wish you guys well. If you have questions, or if you want to reach out to me, if there's any way that I can be praying for you in my quiet time, please reach out. You can follow me on Instagram at callmejazz. That's CALL_me, ME_jazz with 1 Z. I'm also on Facebook, just under Jasmine with a Z, Jasmine Price. That'll be changing soon because the kid's getting married next month. Or of course you can message me on YouTube, however you feel free, or however you want to, feel free to reach out. Thank you guys for watching.